The region of the Middle East that we currently call Iraq is the home of a diverse set of ethnic and religious people groups with a rich history. So much so that a border that surrounds the home of these groups cannot truly represent the groups that live there. So, to truly understand the diversity of this region, we must reimagine this area of the map as the people groups who share it. To start off, who makes up this region currently? Ethnically, around 75% of the Iraqi population is Arabian, making up most of the total population. Following that are Kurdish people, who make up 17% of the population. The remaining 8% are various other ethnic groups, including Assyrians, Persians, and other tribal groups. And with a population of 43 million as of 2026, all these groups are huge. The religious composition of Iraq is plenty more diverse. The official religion in the region of Iraq is Islam, of which around 95% of the population practices. More specifically, around 55% of Muslims identify as Shia, and 45% of Muslims identify as Sunni. While fundamentally following the same core beliefs, their differences lie mostly politically in who the true successor of Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam, is. Sunni Muslims generally favor the community-agreed leaders that followed after Prophet Muhammad. On the other hand, Shia Muslims generally favor his lineage receiving the authority. This divide and inter-conflict between the two groups have been consistent throughout its history globally, so much so that it's influenced many parts of Iraq's history as a nation-state. More on that later. Some of the other religious groups in the region include Christians, making up 1% of the total population, who also, by the way, actually have one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, going back to biblical times. A few other more niche beliefs make up another 1% of the population, and 3% are unspecified. These groups have played a role in shaping and opposing the state, molding it into what it is today. In this video, our group will go over some of the most pivotal moments in the nation's history and how these people groups have played a part in each of these moments to really understand why we should reimagine the region as the people groups that live in it. Before Iraq was recognized as a nation, the region that makes up the current country was under control of the Ottoman Empire since the 16th century, so around 400 years. However, World War I from 1914 to 1918 was the gravestone of this empire, as the declining empire would be on the losing side of the war and lose its lands from the treaties that followed. While the people in the former Ottoman-controlled provinces of Mosul, Baghdad, and Basra were likely glad that they weren't under the control of the Ottomans anymore, another empire would replace its previous control. In 1916, the British and the French secretly agreed that in a victory over the Ottoman Empire, they would split its territories between themselves in an agreement known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement. During the war, the British take Baghdad and the following provinces of Mosul and Basra in 1917 and kept control over the land as the war ended, controlling about 3 million people in these provinces at the time. Can I get British colonization for 1,000, please?
This form of money collection by the British government has been the cause of multiple revolts spanning across multiple continents for hundreds of years.
What is taxation?
You got it.
As the British usually do, taxes were immediately brought onto its new subjects to squeeze every penny the area is worth and to likely pay for the damages the recent war dealt to Britain's pockets. Naturally, everybody was upset that a foreign power on an island tucked away in a different continent called the shots. In addition, this was around the same time as former US President Woodrow Wilson declared the idea of self-determination, or the belief of people having the right to govern themselves. This idea began to grow globally, leading to nationalism spreading everywhere, including these regions, and so many secret nationalistic groups started to gain traction and brew in the background. In 1919, protests on British control began to brew in the shrines of An-Najaf and Karbala, who were receiving pilgrims for the Islamic celebration of Ramadan. During one of these demonstrations in An-Najaf, a British officer died, leading to arrests being made to punish and scare protesters, which did not faze them as the situation grew even more intense. At this point, everybody was mad. The Turkish couldn't find jobs on the shifting political scene, taxes rubbed salt into the wound for everybody, and the whole thing was about to blow up. In June of 1920, the League of Nations approved a British mandate over these three regions in what would be combined into the country that is currently Iraq. A mandate allowed the British to give a helping hand to the developing regions until it was deemed ready to be its own nation. Naturally, everybody already in the region was livid that the British were tightening their grip on their land, and so the previous protests from before grew into a nationwide armed revolt, as in a historical moment both Sunni and Shia Muslims would unite to resist the tightening British rule. Leaders of both Sunni and Shia groups approved of the revolt, which would soon grow to be massive. Political prisoners were released, British outposts were attacked, and demonstrations were a common occurrence. As the unrest grew, other groups would join in the rebellion, as Kurdish people in the north would take up arms as well. Around 130,000 people joined this organized nationwide revolt, and thousands would die on both sides of the revolution. The British called on Sir Percy Zachariah Cox, the High Commissioner of Iraq, who was basically the British representative of the region, to do something about this. He reasoned that suppressing the revolt by aerial campaign would be the most cost-effective approach, and so they used it to cut off supplies going to Karbala and got ready to bomb al-Najaf, leading to both cities surrendering by October of 1920. While the revolt didn't directly lead to independence, it was a step in the right direction. The British realized that directly controlling the region would be too much to handle, and so in a totally not British motivated move, the High Commissioner set up the Council of Ministers, who he convinced this guy to govern as Prime Minister in this new government system. In 1921, they would take it a step further and set up a monarchy and crown Faisal I from the Hashemite dynasty in Syria to be crowned King of Iraq in a public vote that was definitely not influenced by the British. The British chose to work with the minority Sunni Muslims, who made up around 20% of the total population at the time, to impose a divide and rule strategy by neglecting the other people groups, especially the majority Shia Muslims, to divide these groups, making them easier to control and preventing them from uniting against the British rule. This method of rule would lead to a deeper division between these different groups in the future of Iraq's history. More on that later on. At the time, however, independence continued to be worked out diplomatically. In June of 1930, Iraqi Prime Minister Nuri al-Said helped pass the Anglo-Iraqi Treaty, calling for the British mandate to be released from Iraq, making them an independent state. And in 1932, they would be officially recognized as a member of the League of Nations. It's important to note that while Iraq was officially independent from the British kept their influence on the region by maintaining their military presence and having access to the country's oil, and also being the ones that set up their whole monarchy. So maybe that's why they were willing to compromise. Anyways, this is an important event in Iraqi history because it is a historic first instance where people groups in multiple regions united to oppose colonial rule, which would eventually lead to what we now call the state of Iraq. The way that these groups influenced and contributed to the formation of Iraq shows why these different groups should be recognized apart from the territory they've been combined into.
When you look at a map of Iraq, you see a single country bound by international lines drawn in the sand. But if we really want to understand its histories and its struggles, we have to look past the map. Restating what Bodwell said previously, because of how diverse the region is, we should imagine Iraq not as a single state, but as the distinct people groups that actually inhabit the area. For centuries, this land was a shared land of Shia, Sunni Arabs, Kurds, Turkmen, Yazidis, and ancient Christian communities. But following World War I, Western powers such as the United Kingdom lumped these distinct people groups into one artificial state under a British-backed monarchy. But by July 14th, 1958, this forced artificial state collapsed. The 14th July Revolution wasn't just an overthrow of the monarchy. In reality, under the image of a united state, it was a violent collapse built from the pressure where a forced national identity collided with the real diverse groups on the ground. To keep this diverse population under control, the British installed a Hashemite monarchy. This state structure was built to favor a small, mostly urban group of elite, largely ignoring the communal realities of the rest of the country. All the main power was highly centralized in Baghdad. Just imagine, if you were placed straight in Baghdad, you might think, oui, man, Iraq is so great and highly developed. But if you stepped outside the capital, Iraq looked completely different. In the mountainous north, the Kurds wished for autonomy. Autonomy! In the rural south, marginalized Shia communities worked the lands of the wealthy landlords in the area. Bro, oh my gosh, bro, I just gotta keep working. The monarchy tried to project a unified, pro-Western Iraqi kingdom, but you cannot erase generations of cultural, linguistic, and religious identities with a royal decree. The people are what make up a government and country, and the people groups within Iraq feel disconnected from their own government. Well, now that we know the context of the revolution, let's see how it actually went down. So, you can tell by the name July 14th Revolution. It happened on July 14th, 1958. This revolution was led by Brigadier Abdul Karim Qasim and Colonel Abdul Salam Arif, whose group was called the Free Officers. They overthrew this monarchy in a single bloody morning. Now let's see how it went from their perspective.
Hey man, you ready to overthrow the government?
Yeah bro, what time we head into the Royal Al Rahab Palace?
Let's start at 5 o'clock a.m., man.
That's a plan. And so, off the Free Officers went to the palace. And so they arrived at the palace, looking for King Fasil II's head.
Come out! We know you're in there!
And so, the king, 23-year-old King Fasil II, realizing resistance was futile, ordered his guards to surrender.
Surrender!
Hoping to spare his family, the young king walked out into the courtyard, holding a holy Quran above his head as a symbol of peace. Behind him followed his grandmother, his aunts, and his uncle, who was the deeply unpopular Crown Prince Abd Allah. The rebels lined them up against the courtyard wall. Then, chaos erupted. Someone had just opened fire. Captain Abd al-Sattar al-Busi, a rebel officer fueled by rage stemming from multiple years of oppression, stepped forward and opened fire with his rifle. A hail of bullets tore through the courtyard. The crown prince died instantly, while King Faisal II collapsed, bleeding out from multiple chest wounds in the dirt. All it took was one burst of gunfire, and the Hashemite monarchy was completely erased. A republic was declared, but it was born in absolute blood. At first, this victory felt like a liberation for Iraq's diverse communities. Qassam realized that the old system failed because it ignored the people. His own message that he spread was that he was the servant of the people. For a brief moment, the marginalized communities, from the Kurds in the north to the impoverished Shia peasants who flooded into Baghdad's newly built townships, felt like they had a voice in their own destiny.
Whoa, this place is tough.
Well, now that we got to how this revolution went down, what was the aftermath of it? Well, it wasn't really all sunshine and rainbows, as you might think. In reality, removing a king didn't erase the fundamental challenge. How would you govern a state made of deeply distinct people groups? In fact, almost immediately, the revolutionary group fractured, differing with the lines of different identities and beliefs. Colonel Arif wanted Iraq to merge with Egypt into one giant pan-Arab union, basically the opposite of what they were fighting for originally. A move that terrified the Kurdish population and non-Arab minorities, who feared the identities and cultures would be completely swallowed up again. Prime Minister Qasim said, "No, this is not what we promised the people." However, trying to balance all of Iraq's people groups wasn't possible. Without a shared identity that respected each other, they quickly divided into their own factions. In the years that passed, Qasim was actually overthrown himself. It seemed, to rule the people, you couldn't do it by consensus, but it had to be done by force. Ultimately, the 14th July Revolution teaches us that borders drawn on the map can never truly show the people on the ground. This revolution is one of many that shows the struggle for identity and culture within the diverse state of Iraq, where everyone is forced to be one single identity. Now, on to Mahawi for more information for the years after this revolution.
Saddam Hussein was born on April 28, 1937, in the village of Al-Jawa, Iraq. He grew up in poverty and had a rough childhood. Later on, he joined the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party. After the July 17 revolution in 1968, he gained power fast. In 1979, he became president and ruled Iraq through fear and strict control. During his rule, Saddam targeted minority groups, especially Kurdish and Shia Muslim. His government used arrest, torture, execution, and mass violence against people who disagreed with him. In Anfal campaign in 1980s, Kurdish villages were destroyed and thousands of civilians were killed. In 1988, chemical weapons were used in Al-Jaba and entire families were killed in minutes. Survivors described running through streets filled with gas, with no warning and nowhere to escape. Saddam also led Iraq into three major wars. The first one was the Iran and Iraq War, which lasted 8 years and caused huge deaths on both sides. Family lost father, sons, and homes, and the country was drained by constant fighting. The second one was the Gulf War. After Iraq invaded Kuwait, the U.S. and its allies started a bombing campaign across Iraq. The third one was the Iraq War, when the United States and its allies finally invaded Iraq and removed Saddam Hussein from power. These wars and his brutal rule caused deep suffering inside of Iraq. Many people lived in fear, many lost their loved ones or were forced to flee their home. Entire communities were broken apart, and the country became unstable for many years. In 2003, Saddam Hussein was captured while hiding near Tikrit in Iraq. He was later tried for his crimes during his rule and executed in 2006. The chaos, fighting, and the division left after Saddam Hussein's rule helped terrorist groups like ISIS grow. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, other known as ISIS, rose during the chaos. After the fall of Saddam Hussein, Iraq became divided and unstable, and ISIS used that chaos to gain power, weapons, and fighters. In 2014, ISIS captured big cities like Mosul and tried to create their own extremist state. ISIS ruled with fear and violence. The group killed civilians, attacked minority groups like the Yazidis, and punished anyone who went against them. Many families lost their home and had to run away from the fighting. Iraq and the United States and other countries fought ISIS for years. The battles destroyed many cities and killed thousands of people. By 2019, ISIS lost most of its land and power. Even after ISIS fell, it left behind destroyed cities, millions of displaced people, and fear that still affects in Iraq and Syria today.
Since ISIS lost its territory in 2017, the fight for Iraq's identity has been about how these different groups survive and fit together. First, it is important to talk about the reconstruction after ISIS. After Mosul was finally liberated from ISIS, data from the World Bank calculated that it would take a massive $88 billion just to fix basic infrastructure. This whole mess left around 1.2 million people, mostly Sunnis and minority Yazidis, to be removed from their homes. A lot of them still can't go back to their hometowns because they are completely destroyed, or because their neighborhoods are now occupied by the Popular Mobilization Forces, which are these powerful Shia militias that basically took over the local power balance. Next, we have the Tishri movement. In October 2019, huge crowds of young people started protesting across the Shia majority areas, and their main slogan was, "We want a homeland." This was a massive split inside the Shia community itself. The younger generation was fed up with the corrupt power sharing agreements and foreign countries messing with them, so they demanded to be treated like actual citizens with real jobs instead of religious groups. Finally, there's modern diversity and environmental risk. Iraq's diversity is honestly shrinking right now because smaller groups like Christians and the Yazidis keep leaving the country since they don't feel safe. At the same time, crazy climate change is completely drying up the southern marshes. This is a huge deal because it's destroying the way of life for the marsh Arabs, who have lived there for thousands of years. Since the main government sucks at helping them, people have to rely on their own tribal and ethnic identities just to get by. When you realize that over 210,000 civilians have died from violence since 2003, you see how much trauma everyone is dealing with. As of now, thousands of families are still rehabilitating from the scars left by ISIS ideology and other regimes. So if we want to reimagine Iraq, we can't just look at it as one big border made by colonists hundreds of years ago. We have to see it as a region of diverse people groups. Thank you for listening.